Welcome back for Mr. Question Channel. Today is book review day. We're going to be tackling a really cool book today, Do Hard Things. You know, you hear that title and you immediately think of like that classic image of toughness, right? Just like gritting your teeth and pushing through no matter what.
It's funny, though, because the book actually kind of flips that whole idea on its head.
Really?
Yeah, it argues that real toughness, like the kind that actually helps you navigate life's challenges, isn't about ignoring your feelings or pretending to be some kind of superhuman. It's way more about self-awareness, understanding your limits, and developing the skills to handle whatever comes your way.
So it's not about just powering through.
Exactly. Like, think about it. Have you ever tried to just tough it out and ended up, like, totally burning yourself out?
Oh, yeah, all the time. I mean, I think that's something a lot of people struggle with, especially in today's world.
Mhm.
You know, there's so much pressure to always be on and achieving.
Absolutely. And the book starts with some pretty intense examples of that old school tough guy mentality, like the Junction Boys football training camp. I don't know if you remember Bear Bryant, that coach who basically ran like a military boot camp to try and toughen up his players.
Oh, yeah, I've heard stories about those camps. They sound brutal.
They were, but the book uses those examples to show the limitations of that approach. It's like the military itself realized that just throwing recruits into grueling situations wasn't enough to create truly resilient soldiers.
Right. So what do they find worked better?
Well, they discovered that teaching soldiers coping skills, emotional regulation, how to handle stress, that was far more effective in preparing them for the real deal, like actually being in combat.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So where do we even start with this whole like redefining toughness thing?
The book says the first step is ditching the facade, dropping the act, and being really honest with yourself about what you're capable of. There's this great story about an Olympic runner, Buddy Edelin, who was so obsessed with training that he couldn't even rest for fear of falling behind.
Oh, wow. That's intense.
Right. It makes you wonder how much of that was like genuine passion versus this need to prove something to himself or to others.
But like that pressure to constantly be striving, to never be satisfied with where you are. I think a lot of us can relate to that feeling, right?
Totally. And the book argues that that kind of obsession with external validation often leads to burnout and a really fragile sense of self-esteem.
Because it's not coming from within, right? It's all based on what other people think.
Exactly. Real confidence comes from knowing yourself, your strengths and weaknesses, and being comfortable with that. It's about learning to push yourself without breaking and recognizing that setbacks are just part of the process.
It's about like embracing the whole journey, not just chasing some external marker of success.
Yeah, and that actually leads us to the second pillar of toughness the book talks about, listening to your body. This is where things get really interesting.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
The book argues that feelings are messengers, not dictators. Like, they're trying to tell us something, but we don't always have to obey them.
Okay, that's interesting. But how do we know which feelings to listen to and which ones to, ignore?
It's not so much about ignoring them as understanding them. The book talks about this concept of interoceptive awareness, which is basically like being in tune with your internal state.
Oh, like being able to recognize what your body is feeling and why you're feeling it.
Yes, exactly. Like if you can read your body's signals, you can start to figure out what they mean and then regulate your emotions more effectively instead of just reacting all the time.
So it's like learning to be like an observer of your own emotions rather than just getting swept away by them.
Yeah, it's about creating that space between the feeling and your reaction.
That's powerful.
Yeah.
So once we start to get better at that, what's the next step?
Well, then we can move on to the third pillar, responding instead of reacting. And the book talks about this really cool idea of having calm conversations with yourself.
Calm conversations. What does that even mean?
Imagine it like this. You're feeling stressed, overwhelmed, whatever. Instead of just freaking out or shutting down, you have this internal dialogue that helps you make sense of what you're feeling.
Oh, okay. So it's like you're talking yourself through it.
Yeah.
But in a calm and rational way.
Right. You're using that space we talked about to choose a thoughtful response rather than just reacting impulsively. It's like training your brain to engage the prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for logical thinking and emotional regulation.
So instead of letting your emotions hijack you, you're basically taking back control.
Exactly. And what's really cool is that the book actually offers some pretty interesting exercises to help you practice this. Get this, practicing boredom.
Wait, what? Practicing boredom?
Yeah, it sounds kind of crazy, right? But learning to just sit with your thoughts without constantly reaching for your phone or some other distraction, it can actually train your brain to be more resilient under pressure.
Huh. I never thought about it that way. I mean, in today's world, we're so used to constant stimulation, right?
Totally. But maybe there's something to be said for like intentionally creating those moments of quiet and stillness. What do you think?
I'm terrible at sitting still. My phone is like glued to my hand. But this idea of practicing boredom, there might be something to it. Okay, so tell me more about how boredom actually builds resilience.
Well, think about it this way. When we're constantly like seeking out distractions, we're basically training our brains to avoid any kind of discomfort. Like we're not giving ourselves that space to build up, that mental muscle of resilience, that ability to just sit with uncomfortable feelings and work through them.
So it's like we're always running away from anything that feels even slightly like unpleasant.
Exactly. And boredom, in a way, like forces us to confront that discomfort. It's like, okay, here you go, deal with it.
We're forced to just like be with our own thoughts and figure out how to manage those feelings. Huh. That's pretty powerful.
It is. And that actually brings us to the final pillar of toughness from the book, transcending discomfort.
Okay. Transcend, like going beyond the discomfort.
Yeah, exactly. And this one really emphasizes that real toughness isn't about being some kind of lone wolf, just gritting it out on your own. It's much more about connection, purpose, belonging, those kinds of things.
So it's like flipping the script on that whole like rugged individualist image of toughness, right?
Yeah.
It's saying our strength actually comes from our relationships and the things that give our lives meaning.
Totally. And the book even uses this cool example. It talks about a study of Greg Popovich, the coach of the San Antonio Spurs, the basketball team.
Yeah, he's legendary. Known for being a really great leader and building a strong team culture.
Right. So this study looked at his coaching style and found that coaches who are like super controlling and micromanaging, they actually end up harming their players' performance and well-being in the long run.
So it's like being too tough, too authoritarian can actually backfire.
Yeah, and it makes sense if you think about it. Like if you're constantly being told what to do and how to do it, you never really develop that sense of ownership or autonomy, right?
And I remember reading about those team dinners Popovich hosts. They're like famous for being this way to build camaraderie and connection among the players.
Exactly. It's all about creating an environment where people feel supported, connected, and empowered. Those are like the ingredients for real toughness.
It makes you think about all the times you felt most resilient in your own life, right?
Right.
Like, was it when you were going it alone, or was it when you had people you could lean on and a sense of purpose driving you forward?
That's a really good point. And, the book also talks about this concept of learned helplessness, which is like basically the opposite of toughness.
Okay, learned helplessness. What is that?
It's that feeling of like giving up when you believe you have no control over a situation. And they use this example of these experiments with dogs. I know it's kind of sad, but they would expose these dogs to like electric shocks.
Oh no, poor dogs.
I know, right? But some of the dogs had the ability to stop the shocks and others didn't. And the ones who couldn't control it, they eventually just gave up, even when they were given the option to escape later on.
Oh, wow. That's heartbreaking. But I guess it makes sense. Like, if you're constantly in a situation where you feel powerless, you start to believe that there's nothing you can do to change it.
Exactly. It's like you're training yourself for helplessness. But what's interesting is that the dogs who could control the shocks, their brains actually showed a different response. Their prefrontal cortex, the fire chief we talked about, was more active.
So they were better able to, like, regulate their stress and stay in control, even though the situation was still tough.
Right. So having at least some level of autonomy and choice in our lives seems to be really crucial for building that toughness. But of course, we all face situations where we don't have a lot of control, right?
Yeah, definitely. Life throws curveballs all the time. So how do we cultivate that sense of agency when things feel really out of our hands?
Well, the book talks about the power of like reframing our self-talk. So instead of saying, I can't do this, you shift it to, I can handle this, or I'm going to figure this out.
So it's like, even if the situation itself doesn't change, changing the way you think about it could actually make a difference.
Exactly. And the book says that reframing also applies to like how we view setbacks and failures. Instead of seeing them as signs of weakness, tough individuals actually use them as opportunities to learn and grow.
It's like embracing the fact that failure is just part of life, part of the process.
Right. And what matters is how we choose to respond to those setbacks.
Do we let them define us, or do we use them to become stronger and wiser?
And that brings us to, I think, one of the most important points the book makes. Real toughness isn't about becoming some emotionless robot. It's about developing the emotional intelligence to experience the full spectrum of human emotions.
Hmm.
The joy, the sorrow, the fear, the anger, all of it.
It's like allowing yourself to feel it all without judgment, and then using that awareness to make conscious choices about how you respond to challenges.
Exactly. And the book even talks about grief and how some people who exhibit what psychologists call post-traumatic growth actually use their grief as like a catalyst for positive change.
That's amazing. So instead of trying to suppress or avoid difficult emotions, they actually lean into them and find a way to use them for good.
Right. It suggests that real toughness isn't about avoiding those tough emotions. It's about developing the capacity to feel them deeply, to connect authentically with yourself and others, and to find purpose even in the midst of pain.
That's really powerful. So do hard things.
Yeah.
It sounds like it's about a lot more than just like physical endurance or pushing through pain.
It is. It's more like a call to action.
It's about recognizing that those struggles we face, both individually and collectively, they can actually make us stronger, more compassionate, more connected to ourselves and each other.
Do hard things is like this powerful reminder that true toughness, it's not a destination, it's a journey.
And it's a journey that we can all choose to embark on, right?
Absolutely. And you know what? I highly recommend you buy and read the actual book.
Yes, I second that. It's a really thought-provoking read. So as we wrap up, I'm curious, what stood out to you the most? What
Wow.
aspect of real toughness really resonated with you? And where do you think you could apply these ideas in your own life?
Yeah, let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts.
Thanks for joining us on another deep dive.
See you next time.